The Edmonton Oilers are once again back in the playoffs. We sit down with a local sports radio host about the expectations this year, local sports coverage in the city, and if the Oilers can bring home Lord Stanley. Thank you, Jason, for joining us. You know, the Oilers have made it back into the playoffs once again in oil country. There's a lot of expectations about what they can do this year in the playoffs. Why are those expectations so high for fans in the city?
Well, Edmonton's been the best team in the NHL since Chris Knobloch took over. A really impressive record. I know the last two losses, but when you sit out your seven guys, it doesn't really matter. The Oilers have been really good for a long time. You know, obviously you have Connor McDavid, you have Leon Draisaitl, but they filled out their roster. The emergence, Evan Bouchard just continues to improve. Him and Matthias Ekholm have been one of the most dominant defense pairs in the entire National Hockey League this season. You know, you've added some experience and some grit in Corey Perry. You've got Hyman, you've got Kane. You know, Ryan McLeod's filled out a role. Warren Fogel's having a career year. I look at Edmonton and they're really good. Like, you know what? They've had some heartache, which is usually what it takes to win in the National Hockey League. But the biggest difference is, for the first time maybe ever, at least in this era of Oilers hockey, they've figured out to win. Yeah, you can score all you want, but you got to be sound and consistent defensively. And for the most part, that's what they've done this season under Knobloch. They've lowered their goals against, specifically on 5-on-5. And if you want to win in the NHL, it's the one stat that you can go back and look at teams who win. You got to be good 5-on-5. And the Oilers, they did it at stretches last year. They weren't able to do it continuously. We saw in the playoffs, you know, some blowout losses against Vegas. I'd be surprised if we see that this year. And I'm not saying the Oilers are going to win the Cup. I think they're a very good team. They're one of the Cup contenders. But I'd be surprised if we see a lot of games where the Oilers beat themselves, because last year they were the best team in the NHL at self-destructing, and they kind of eliminated that from their game for the most part.
You've been covering sports in the city for quite a while. This is a new station covering sports in the city. You know, are you doing anything extra to cover this run in the playoffs?
You know what? I try not to. You know, the fans. We have good fans in Edmonton. If you try to give them stuff that's just like gimmicky, they're not going to like it. You know what? At Sports 1440, it's obviously going to be you know, a lot of talk about the Oilers, but also about the playoffs in general, because you know, hockey fans here, they want to watch the Oilers, but you got the Canucks, you got the Jets, you got everybody else involved. It's going to be great, but you know what? We'll have more coverage, you know, a little bit more intense stuff for sure, but probably a little bit more deep dive on the matchups when it gets to, you know, on a game per game basis and evaluate it. But with 4 different shows and different hosts, you can always have kind of different angles that you want to go to. And, you know, and then we have a lot of former guys who played for the Oilers as analysts on our station, so that'll help out a lot.
Extensive coverage is a big thing for, you know, hockey and sports in general. If that element was missing, what would be missing in the city essentially? What is that specific piece about sports coverage locally that, you know, would be gone if there wasn't sports coverage? Well,
that's a big reason why we brought, you know, Sports 1440 and I teamed up with Stingray, because Edmonton's a sports town. You look at, you know what, the history of supporting, not just hockey. Obviously, hockey's the bread and butter, but, you know, they'll support lots of other things, because there's lots of people here who care about sports, and sports is very intertwined in the community, and it's about sports. I think it allows people to connect, right? Like, you want to be part of something, and the fans, you know what, they're at work, they're coming home from work, they're going to work, you know, they're getting set for the game. They just like to hear about what's going on and everybody's different opinion on it. Obviously, when the team wins, everybody's pretty excited. When the team loses, generally guys are problem solvers, right? Anybody out there listening, if you're in a marriage, the one thing you learn sometimes, it's better to say, oh, I understand how you're feeling. Probably takes us 10 years to figure it out. They don't want us to solve their problems. But in sports, everybody's going to have a solution to the problem. What's wrong with the power play? What's wrong with the penalty kill? Why don't you play this pair together? And it makes it fun, and I think it really connects people. There's just something about, you know, live sports talk radio that connects people to the moment. And, you know, if all of a sudden there's a last-minute change in the lineup, you can talk about it right away. So that's great.
For most sports talk shows, the Oilers are the focus, but do they lay the groundwork for universities, colleges, or even other local sports by how much extensive coverage they get? Does it allow other sports teams to also get that coverage when you have stations like yourself covering sports in a broad aspect?
Well, as the guy who runs it, the Oilers don't necessarily control the content. We control the content, and I've always made it a focus that if you want to get to the NHL, you got to play Junior A, right? You got to play, you know, Midget AAA. Obviously, those other levels. We cover a lot of basketball in the show. We have a lot of football. I think sports fans, to me, they want to know what the big story is, so let's talk about the big story. Obviously, right now, the playoffs are going to be the big story in Edmonton, so you'd talk about it. But when the playoffs are over, then the Elks will be the big story, the Riverhawks will be the story, the Stingers. And even when playoffs are on, you do need a break sometimes on those off days to kind of really, hey, let's hear what's going on in the Toronto-Boston series, what's going on in the Florida-Tampa series, what's going on in the NBA. There's a lot of basketball communities. Hey, Jermaine Buckner's from Edmonton. He's on the Boston Celtics coaching staff. So, of course, we would talk about the Celtics as well. So I do think, you tell your audience, hey, we're going to talk about sports and we're going to talk about the hockey the majority of the time, but I still think most of them still want to know what's going on because they're sports fans. They like watching the big story and they want to know what it is.
Circling back to the Oilers playoffs, you did mention it. You don't know if they are going to win or not, but do you think they can win? Lining them up against, Eastern, Western Conference teams, do they have the capability of going all the way to winning Lord Stanley?
I do. I actually think Edmonton, I think LA, they beat them in 7 2 years ago. They beat them in 6 last year. I picked them to beat them in 5 this year. Edmonton's a deeper team than they've been in the past. They know how to play LA system. Then they'll play the winner of Nashville and Vancouver. Now, they've played very well against Nashville for decades. Leon Draisaitl, I don't think I've ever seen a player dominate a team like he does. And Vancouver's a good team too, but I think Edmonton's playoff experience, that's something that Vancouver doesn't have a lot of right now. They have some questions. Is Demko healthy, right, in goal? Edmonton's an extremely healthy team right now. Obviously, Evander Kane missed some games, but he'll be fine. I think Edmonton, their biggest test will be the 3rd round, I think, in Dallas, who I think will come out of there. Or if it's Winnipeg, maybe Colorado, that's obviously going to be a battle. But when you get to the conference final, I don't care who you're playing. You don't luck your way into a conference final. But could the Oilers win the Stanley Cup? 100%. I would say I have never picked the Oilers to win a Stanley Cup in my life. This is the first time I've ever picked them to win the Stanley Cup. I think they're that good. Now, that doesn't mean they'll win, because as we all know, one bad bounce here or there, you get a key injury at the wrong time, and maybe you self-destruct. But Edmonton, Dallas, Florida, Carolina, I think those might be the top teams. But Winnipeg, Colorado, Vancouver, the Rangers, there's a lot of really good teams, and Edmonton's definitely one of them. You don't luck your way into having the best record in the NHL for 69 games under the new head coach.
So you're saying a Carolina-Edmonton Stanley Cup final then?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because on Daily Faceoff, where we do our predictions, that was mine, Carolina and Edmonton. I guess it would be a repeat of 2006. Now, the odds of both of those teams making it, I know, are slim, but Carolina's been a really good team for a long time. And Edmonton, if you look at the progression, they've improved and gotten better every year. I think at this year's deadline, they added even more depth with Adam Henrique and Carrick, and Dylan Holloway now is a guy who's going to be in the mix for them. If they get an injury on defense, Philip Broberg, what he's done in the minors this year has shown that he's a guy who can step in. So Edmonton, I don't see a really glaring weakness on Edmonton. And now it's just going to come down to, in the playoffs, can you play up to your capabilities every night? And that's what makes it so great, because everybody out there has a prediction on who they think is going to win, but none of us know who's going to win, and that's what makes it so exciting.
Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate you talking to us, and it's glad to have you back on the radio stations in the city.
Well, thanks for listening, and enjoy the playoffs.